Awesome, awesome. Uh, thanks for having me, Demetrius. It's great. It's great.
Super stoked for you to be here, man.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Can y'all see my screen?
Yep, it's looking good on my side.
Cool, cool. Then let's go ahead and get started then. Cool, awesome. So for those of you that
You
don't
might
know,
you might want to
I
you
think
might want to mute.
Demetrius said it before, but Code for Philly is a civic hacking organization here in the city of Philadelphia, and we do a whole lot of different projects, and we're involved in a whole different type of I guess, community building. We work on civic hacking mostly from organizations from the city government of Philadelphia and the governments and townships of surrounding areas to nonprofits here in the city of Philadelphia. Anything that really builds on technology and brings in the community and really kind of builds and supports the community. That's kind of where we live in terms of where our technology and where our mission is driven. So that should give you a good idea for what this talk is going to be about. Um, this talk is going to highlight one specific project that we've been working on. It's called the Prevention Point Project, and we can get into that. So first, I'm going to give you guys an overview of what Prevention Point actually is. So Prevention Point is a nonprofit here in the city of Philadelphia. It's a harm reduction organization. It's located in Kensington. So harm reduction, what does that mean exactly? Basically, that means that they have programs that support the community in various different ways. They have a needle exchange. It's actually the only one in Philadelphia, which is pretty interesting considering Philadelphia's size and the issues surrounding the heroin epidemic. We have, or they give out overdose reversal training, wound care, and do many other provide many other programs and services as well, including mail service, medical referrals in case you need medical assistance or you need a referral to a doctor, for instance. And that's not just surrounding addiction or the problems that relate to addiction. It could be something else as well. If you if you are living on the street, they have programs to support and help those folks as well. So they're kind of a vast reaching organization when it comes to supporting the community. And that's primarily who we're helping with this project. There are some side goals with this project, which I'll get into a little bit later, and that kind of ties in with the main theme of the talk. And one of the main benefits of this project that we're hoping to actually get out there is that Prevention Point is a nonprofit organization that relies mostly on refining their data and using their data as justification for funding and support. They get a lot of funding. Most of their funding actually comes from the state of Pennsylvania, and not a lot of people know that. But they use most of their data to support their funding, as well as coming from other organizations that are material and non-material support. So we're hoping with this project that we can actually boost their funding a little bit and kind of boost the, I guess, the support that they're getting. So, so to kind of start out, to give you an overview of where we're coming from in terms of what Prevention Point needs and they what where they're trying to go. So they started out with a system, a non-unified system for um, for participant reporting for each of their programs and services, and pretty much anything involving their daily operation. What that means is that they were essentially manually inputting tables into databases and using that and manually handling those between each of their individual employees that work there and volunteer. And that, at the end of the day, that kind of gets a little tedious. I mean, very tedious, especially when you're talking about people coming in over and over, different people. And when you're talking about the biggest needle exchange in the city of Philadelphia, and actually the only needle exchange in the city of Philadelphia, which puts into perspective the amount of people coming through and the amount of programs and services they're offering on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. When you're dealing with this much data, you kind of need something a little bit more fluid and easier to use in terms of reporting and actual daily use. So we're trying to come up with a unified reporting system that will actually help them achieve that goal. And we believe that we're well on track to do that. And React is actually, and a few other different technologies are putting us on track to actually do that and get a lot of other people involved as well. So without further ado, I think it's demo time, because I think that it's hard. It might be a little difficult to understand exactly what we're building or exactly what it looks like in terms of the actual UI, the actual software, how it works, what type of data we're managing. So I'm going to give a little bit of a brief demo to y'all, and hopefully that'll answer any questions in the abstract as far as where we're at with the project right now, how it looks, how it operates, and hopefully it will get you interested. So let's go ahead and sign in. Um, hmm. So as you can see, this is the login screen for Prevention Point. A little bit of background: we're using React, MobX, and a library called Material UI. It's a React library on the front end. Those of you familiar with it that could compare it to something like Bootstrap.js, Angular Material. If you've ever worked with that, it's kind of an out-of-the-box pattern or component library that you can plug and play with in terms of using different components. It makes building applications a lot quicker, a lot faster, and you don't really have to worry as much about the look and feel, because that all comes attached with certain components out of the box. Like this header component is actually one component by itself, and we can dynamically add and remove items from it, such as these input fields here. So let's go ahead and sign in. So the idea that we want this application to have is that we want one sort of central screen for managing services and programs for Prevention Point, and this pretty much achieves that. So they have a lot. This is kind of our first draft, if you will, with some of their services and some of their programs. And you can see that in the program bar at the top. So they have a lot more programs and services in this, and we're still kind of in the first and early phases of the evolution of the project. So we're expecting to expand this out and add more programs and services as they come in, and make them very UI user-friendly, so that anyone using it on a tablet or a desktop can easily find folks in the queue and get them to where they need to be. So this is also a pretty awesome feature of Material UI, is that it has a lot more. It has components that you can plug and play that are a lot more mature than they otherwise would be if you were to build them yourself. So as you can see, you can kind of click between the different programs here and get a list in the queue So this is a big benefit when we're just starting from the ground up. We can kind of build up something more complex like this and kind of get it out the door as quickly as possible. Prevention Point, this project has been in the works for about a year now. I want to say it's actually on the anniversary. I think it was started this month. It started this month, so that's pretty cool. So unfortunately, I don't know all the acronyms up here and what they mean as far as how they relate to the programs and services, but we can go back to testing here for a minute and we can see that we have several different columns that are associated with any given participant that come in to the system. So we have things like first name, last name, a user ID that gets attached to every single participant that we put in, a time of entry, a status for where they're at. So you can either set them as waiting, stepped out, or left. And these might get changed or modified in the future once we get some feedback from Prevention Point in terms of what their actual needs are, and how they want the evolution of the queue system here to actually look like. The services you can see here are in this column, and we can't modify them here, but we can modify them later on, a little bit later on in the participants view, whether or not they've been seen or not. So if they have been seen, you can kind of just click this and they'll disappear from the queue. That just means that for this particular visit associated with the participant, they've been seen, they've been in to see someone from Prevention Point, and their needs have essentially been addressed. So the participant is still in the system, but the associated visit, this item in the queue, goes away. So if we ever needed to go back and actually re-add a visit, we can do that because they're already in the system. And then we have a column for notes. So if there was something like allergies or some sort of preconditions or anything that is associated with a particular participant that Prevention Point should know about, then we can add that here and notify the folks who need to know. So let's go ahead and check out a little bit more about the system. So we can come in here to the participant search drawer, and we can search up a few different folks. So the idea behind the participant search drawer is that we are calling out individual participants that are here in the queue, and we can search for them. So we get a lot more people here that are named with the last name White that aren't in the system, and we can modify them as well. So they don't have to already be in line for a visit. They can have a previous visit associated with them, and we can. That was hiding there a little bit, and then we can go ahead and go in and modify. So let's actually go ahead and add a new participant down here. This is one of the ways where we will actually add a completely new participant to the system if they were coming in for the first time, or if there were any, or if they'd never been to Prevention Point before. We can do that. So go ahead and come up with fictitious name and fictitious date, date of birth. And we will initial the user ID there. So and put in the race and gender, has insurance, and they do. So, and then we can put them into a specific program and service column. So we want to go testing, and this is, if you remember, the service column inside of the queue. We can actually go and change through the different services that person might need. So they might need results, or they might need SNS or a confirmation for testing. So we're going to go ahead and confirm. And this column basically relates back to the queue. Essentially, it's just a priority column saying that so they should, with the priority order of where this participant should be. So we'll go ahead and make a test note. Go ahead and move that out. And then we can click add to queue. So now we see her in the queue. So she is waiting for confirmation at testing, and I believe, yep. So, and that's pretty much the basic flow, essentially, of what we're getting at right now, and what this will replace. This is just here to, so far, it manages participant information and participant data on the UI for specific services and under specific programs. So this is kind of where we're at right now in terms of getting feedback and project development, hoping that we can take this to the next level and we can kind of integrate a lot of the other services and a lot of the other needs that Prevention Point has going forward, and solve those problems as well and integrate it into the system. So let's go ahead and I'm actually going to go back, and we're going to modify Wendy. Yeah, so this would be a scenario where we would go back and we would need to edit participant information. So we can come back here and only have access to this sliver of information. Because Wendy already has a visit in the system, there's no need to modify that. She's already linked to a visit that's currently happening. So if we had, for instance, we wanted to change her birthday. Well, actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and change the ID, because the ID should reflect in the queue itself. And change the birthday. And okay, and change the last name. So now when we hit add to queue, we can actually modify, that data, the UID, and her last name, or their last name, on the actual queue itself. And this happens with every program, every service. So, and we can even do this from the queue page as well. In fact, when we do it from the queue page, we can modify the visit directly, because in the queue, that is the visit, essentially. It's the visit linked with that individual participant. So if we wanted to, maybe this wasn't as big of a deal, and we made a mistake on the confirmation and wanted to go for needs results, and then maybe change the note, so it has changed. We can go ahead and do that as well. So now the priority has switched, and we have her here, we have them there, and we can check that the notes have been changed. So that is, yeah, so that's all correct, that's all good. And that's pretty much what we have so far in terms of the project. We're looking to take it a little bit further, like I said, and work closely with Prevention Point to see what their needs are and their needs in the future, and evolve it to a point where they're able to use this software to funnel it into impactful solutions and impactful change for their programs, their services, their funding, pretty much their whole operation. So let's go ahead and get back to the presentation. So now that you know what we're working with, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the technology behind it. I noted when we went into the demo that the front-end stack is React, MobX, Material UI, which is a pre-made component library based off of the material styling from Google, and Jest. That is, for the most part, our whole front-end stack. There are a few other things in there, like if you look in our package JSON, you'll see like Node, Sass, and all that good stuff. That probably eventually will be used or not, but that stuff is pretty much up in the air. But for the time being, this is our core. This is our core stack with an ES linter and a prettier hookup. So we have those two looking together as far as our linting and our code formatting goes, and that's run every push. So that's actually automated and automatically linted for errors, and that's also done as at build time when we push all of our pull requests through Travis CI, the Travis CI tool on GitHub. And one of the I guess selling points about keeping the stack this simple is that for the most part, everything in this stack is somewhat widely adopted. I mean, React is, super widely adopted. It's the most popular front-end framework by far. So it's pretty important to, and MobX is kind of like, that's our data layer, that's our data store. It's kind of like a Redux stand-in, but in a much more simpler fashion. So the idea of keeping it simple kind of lends itself to being very easy to pick up in terms of people coming in and out of the project. A lot of the developers that are front-end veterans will be able to come in and understand right away what's going on. Even some of the newer folks, some of the people that are going to code schools or picking up code for the first time or don't have any idea how to code, they'll be able to look at the documentation that's out there, maybe take some of the examples from the project, maybe some of the smaller, more, the simpler components in terms of like data flow and rendering, and be able to at least kind of grok what's going on. And if they don't, that's okay too, because everything is meant to be very simple. Everything is meant to be kind of understandable, and then at that point you can ask someone who's more experienced, and they can kind of give you the lowdown. But nothing here is really too complex as far as integrating build tools, or as far as like going out of your way to implement new technology and make a kind of introducing more complications than you really need to. And I think that's one of the things that's very important about this project, because if you want to get the most people on board with being able to improve your community or the society around you, I think that you should be able to have an access point that's fairly easy to jump onto. Now, does that mean that everything is easy, or that there's not a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of legwork or groundwork to kind of get to a point where you need to understand it? I don't think so. If you're jumping into this for the first time, it is going to look kind of daunting. You're not going to really understand, a lot of this, but I think it's fairly easy to run them up and get them kind of caught up on how things work. What's the data flow? How everything is working in unison to come together for the front end application. So here we have a diagram of the front end application and how it actually interacts with the back end and our Postgres database. So I'm going to run through this a little bit. So essentially, we have React and MobX on the front end here, and users mostly interacting with the React router and pretty much all the good stuff, the chocolate, the nougat from React, in terms of the UI components, the rendering, all that's handled, all the view stuff is handled by React, and we've abstracted the data layer of MobX, or we've abstract the data layer to MobX, and that is kind of like, that is the data handler for our application. So we essentially relegated React to functional components, and we feed and change the data through the store itself. So in this diagram, yep, that's pretty much the same thing. So the user will interact. So for instance, they'll log in, they'll send the authentication requests through React. React will send it to the MobX store. So we'll handle that there. The MobX store will make the actual API call to verify the authentication. and that will hit the Django backend. It's pretty interesting because the backend is fairly plug and play with Django, and the way that they set up the roots, the views, and the models. Um, I'm not too familiar with the exact, I forget the framework that they used, but everything essentially was set up, was already set up. So most of the work on this project is actually within the front end itself. So to go back to the example, we'll when we go to authenticate, we'll run through the roots, views, and models, and go in and actually find the actually verify in the database, and then that'll get sent out through the views, and then we're able to log into our application. We get back a JWT token, which is stored in local storage, but handled through the MobX store again. That's our data layer. That's where we handle all of that good crunchy data. And that's pretty much the architecture as far as our application goes. To just give you guys an overview of the actual development pipeline, it's a little bit different than your average development job. So essentially, there's no agile, and the process is very stripped down. We start usually by powwowing out issues in our weekly meetings, and we generate issues, or we generate tickets on GitHub, and we assign them to whoever really wants to take them. It's kind of just like a volunteer process. I mean, if you have the experience, or if you want to have that experience of developing a certain piece of functionality, you can jump in and do it. One of the habits we've tried to get into recently is that we've tried to pair up more experienced developers with less experienced developers as a way to kind of mitigate technical debt, and try to bootstrap the education process within the application a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, even though the technology stack is fairly simple as far as development goes, if you're already experienced or if you're up and coming, you might not know anything or know what to do when you jump in for the first time. So that pairing is actually pretty crucial, and it's something that we're testing out. We're hoping that it goes well, so that when we're bootstrapping folks that are coming into the project for the first time, they can kind of get on board fairly quickly and kind of get a better idea. And that works for a number of different ways. That also works for them and their skills that they get. The more education and the more onboarding, the less they're flopping around like a fish when they actually try and make a pull request, and the more skills that they can actually take from here and apply to other projects, or maybe even a job at some point. So that's a valuable pipeline that I think goes beyond the scope of the project, but also allows for future projects to build in for that type of technology. So to get back to the pipeline a little bit, we develop features and associated tests. Right now, we kind of have been neglecting the unit testing a little bit, but we're kind of on a trend to move back towards that and try and get a cohesive pipeline for when we eventually hand this project off for maintenance. And that's something that I'll get into a little bit. I kind of didn't mention that. So once we submit our code through a PR on GitHub, we have two things that happen in terms of automation. We have a Travis CI tool, continuing integration, and we have a linter that runs all the tests and all of the linting. So that needs to pass, and then we need an approval from at least one developer. So we've been actually kind of lucky. We've been putting on more developers as of late, and we've been getting really good feedback in our PRs and really good collaboration going on. So cue the rocket ship emoji, because we're taking off. And then the code is merged, and then everyone can pull down the code. So that's essentially the process. If it's fairly straightforward, pretty simple. We're not making anyone sit through any retros or anything like that. So You can be sure about that. Um, Architectural takeaways. So there are a few things that I did mention here. One of the one of the good benefits about focusing on widely adopted and accessible technologies such as React and MobX and Redux, and testing libraries and Django is that there is a lot of documentation out there. You can go and you can pick this stuff up and you can kind of play around with it, and you will have a lot of support. It's not like you're, programming in Rust for the first time, or you're doing WebAssembly, where it's like there might not be that much documentation out there, or if there is, it could be confusing or maybe a little contradictory. This stuff has been around for a little bit, so there are best practices on how to handle it, and it's very, very supportive. I mean, Facebook's not going away anytime soon, and neither is the React team. So you can bet on that sticking around for a while. So the projects that you pick up and start with here are definitely going to be somewhat future-proof as far as technologies that come in are concerned. And JavaScript's not going away anytime soon, last I checked. So I think it's very important to kind of focus on accessible code bases and accessible tech as far as building up these social projects, building up these civic projects, working with government on them, because government is not going away. We're not going to. Hopefully, the coronavirus isn't going to send us into anarchism, but um, they're always going to be around. So these projects are always going to be around. So you might as well take advantage of the most widely adopted technologies. That's going to kind of build you into something of like a future proofing in a way, and hopefully it stays that way. Uh, the one thing that I didn't mention actually was the issue with bugs and troubleshooting. I said there was a lot of documentation out there already for getting started, but what about issues that you're running into where you can't render a list, or there's a performance problem? Well, most of that has thankfully also already been figured out, and you can read, article upon article out there. Take a look at examples. Use pre-made libraries that people have already solved, that use to solve these solutions. So that's also another green check essentially for it. I've mentioned real world skills. You're taking these widely adopted technologies, you're taking someone from a code school and you're giving them real world experience, or you're taking someone who doesn't know anything about code and you're giving them kind of like an open source education in a way, and then you're throwing them back out into the world. Well, now you've equipped them with the most powerful tool, which is knowledge. They can go and they can build these applications themselves. They can go and they can, make a new app that helps their community, or they can focus this at their job. Those are all really, really important skills that I don't think anyone would trade away for, because they help. They help. Let's see here. And the one thing that is kind of interesting is that I think that this is more of a check against not necessarily the technology, but the process. And it's harder to manage, and I wouldn't say, I guess it's harder to manage people coming in, people coming out. This is more of a code for Philly thing, or a civic development thing, more or less, because you have people coming in that might be an expert one month and then they might be gone the next. So you might have you might have a project lead and a project manager and the whole team and everything, and they're all working for a couple months, and then someone has a commitment that they have to take, or that they can't contribute anymore. So people start to drop off, and now you're left with more of a junior type of team. And that's not the craziest thing in the world. It happens all the time. It happens in business sometimes. It's just that I think the turnover is a little bit less extreme. So you might have someone who's more junior who comes in and contributes as they should, but they might not have a direction on their compass, which they're really supposed to be pointing to. So that's another plus that goes back to the widely adopted technologies and documentation. But right now, that's a problem we're trying to solve with the pairing of experience. The more experienced with the less experienced. We're hoping that trend builds folks into becoming, very good developers. And using those skills in various places. So let's see here. Next steps. So the point where our compass is focused on are these three items essentially, or we're hoping to get to these three items in the next couple months. So the first thing is administration functionality, the adding, modification, deprecation, um, pretty much the more editing on the participant side and the different levels and how they're split up between the user profiles for Prevention Point. So we're hoping to have an admin and a regular user functionality and separate the two. I think that's something that we've already talked to Prevention Point about, and we're hoping to get on that in the next month, 2 months or so. Um, Custom forms. Prevention Point has a ton of forms. They have a lot of different programs. They have a lot of different forms, and it's not just internet digital forms. We're talking paper forms. So they have an unbelievable amount of forms. So in the future, we will be converting those to digital, and we'll probably be working on a React modular component React system to actually build those forms and make them, and maybe even come up with a little bit of a mini library to actually use those forms and mix and match how they want in case there is new functionality or new services coming in the future. Um, the open source BI tools, we're looking to, like I said before in the beginning, we're looking to take a lot of that data that Prevention Point is bringing in terms of their services, their programs, and turning that into actionable items. You know, how much Narcan do you need? How much Narcan did you use last quarter? What services were effective? How many medical referrals did you get? And be able to turn that out into actual data and fund the programs that need funding and make sure people are getting that help that they need. And that is pretty much it. If and make sure people are getting that. If you need, I would say if you want to help with the project, there are several links here. So the first one is obviously the codeforphilly.org link. You can go there and sign up. It's free. There's no fees, I promise. And there are a bunch of different awesome projects over there, not just Prevention Point, but a whole bunch of different ones helping many different organizations, including the city of Philadelphia. We do a lot of work with them. The second link is the Code for Philly Prevention Point link. And that's our GitHub. So if you want to contribute, or if you think you can, definitely hit us up. Give it a watch, and make a mini pull request. That's going to be my challenge to you folks out there, because most of the work that we're trying to do right now is all React related. So I feel like a lot of people here should feel at home with that. The second one, or the third one, is our meetup. That is just the place where we have meetups, scheduled meetups every week. So you'll know what the schedule is and all that. Our Twitter's up there too, and our Slack as well. We use Slack a lot, so feel free to come by, sign up, check out all the different projects. That's pretty much where most of the conversation happens. Other than that, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I hope that I was able to give you guys an idea of what Code for Philly is doing these days, and especially in terms of this project, the Prevention Point project.
All right, Chris, thank you so much, dude. That was super dope. Definitely have some people in the chat that are excited to get involved. I know Angel Young was talking about how she's already been pretty involved with this project specifically. Definitely would love to connect after this and see how we can better serve you with Reactadelphia's community and get a little bit more involved in especially the pair programming stuff. I mean, that stuff is super interesting for a lot of our, we definitely have a lot of bootcamp grads in our community, so they're definitely looking for ways to A, get their portfolio started, B, give back, and C, meet and speak to devs and engineers who are willing to kind of help them move into the next step. And for me, that was Chris Alfano in the very beginning of my bootcamp graduation. He was the first person to pull me aside and actually give me the time of day, and believed in me right from the get-go, and we still keep up to this day. So I've had nothing but good things to say about Code for Philly and the people that come from it.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
See you later, brother.
See you.